The Dolphins are looking to get back on the horse against the New York Jets in Week 15, their latest pursuit of win number 10 this season. We're joined by John Butchko of Locked On Jets here on this crossover Thursday here on the Locked On Network.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is Thursday here on the Locked On Network, and you know what that means. It's time for another crossover episode, and we have an AFC East matchup this week between Locked On Dolphins and Locked On Jets. I'm Kyle Krabs of Locked On Dolphins, joined by John Butchko of Locked On Jets for our second crossover of this season, and the second in just a few weeks. There's been some things that have changed for both of these teams since the last time that they played each other. So we're going to get you filled in on everything you need ahead of the Week 15 clash between these AFC East rivals. This crossover Thursday episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL in all lowercase for a first deposit match of up to $100. John, been a minute, but not too long. How you doing?
Doing well. These teams haven't played yet this year, right? I feel like I may have blocked out that first game based on what happened on Black Friday.
Yeah, it's certainly. I appreciate the fact, though, even though it's only been a couple of weeks, there are a number of storylines for both of these teams that are fresh and new, and the Dolphins getting a different starting quarterback, and I think that's probably where it starts off of the performance that Zach Wilson put on display last week against Houston in a big home win. So how does that Zach Wilson performance kind of have everybody buzzing right now about the Jets?
I think more than anything, it just kind of takes some of the pressure off. There's been so much negativity around this team. They were on a 5-game losing streak heading into that game against Houston. Zach Wilson, once again, had been benched. I mean, I think it's like the fourth time in the last calendar year he was benched. It was heading into that Black Friday game. They benched him twice last year. Over the offseason, they traded for Aaron Rodgers, which, of course, relegated him to the bench, and then Rodgers gets hurt, so he goes back in the lineup. Zach Wilson's career, future with the Jets is very much up in the air right now, but at least now there's something positive to talk about. At least now it's not overwhelming negativity. In New York, the reactions tend to be overreactions. Now there's talk, are the Jets going to pick up Zach Wilson's fifth-year option? Is Zach Wilson now the quarterback of the future? I mean, a week ago, he was never going to play for the Jets again after this season. I think everybody needs to relax a little bit, but at least now you feel like it was a release, I think, more than anything, where there's no more talk, at least for 1 week, about the negativity around the team. Everything just feels better after a win. Bill Parcells, great coach who coached the Jets for 3 years and then ran the Dolphins for a couple of years. I think he had a saying, winning is a great deodorant. This Jets team still has a lot of issues. This Jets team still not going to make the playoffs, but for 1 week you can at least feel good around the facility.
Well, and you talk about overreactions. This past game for Miami is the one that everybody's trying to forget and has prompted some strong overreactions from the Dolphins fan base as well. Of course, Dolphins on Monday Night Football get 2 late turnovers and score 2 touchdowns in a minute of game clock in the final 6 minutes to go up 14 points and proceed to give up 15 points in the final 3 minutes and 30 seconds to lose to the Titans, a 5-8 Titans football team. The Dolphins with a chance to win that football game, go back into the number 1 seed in the AFC Conference. And instead, they're 9-4 and kind of looking over their shoulder at the playoff field. And there's the stench of last year's 5-game losing skid that the Dolphins endured, where they were 8-3. They came out of the bye. They had a week 11 bye. They won against the Texans and then lost their next 5 football games to fall to 8-8 from 8-3. And Dolphins fans have just kind of been predisposed. These are 2 long-suffering fan bases, so I know you can sympathize with this as well, John. But just the knee-jerk reaction is up. Here we go again. And so it begins. Colossal collapse by the Dolphins in prime time. And then you look at the remaining strength of schedule where they got the Cowboys and the Ravens and the Bills who have had so much success against this team. I do think this is a big bounce back opportunity for the Dolphins, but everybody's kind of anxiously awaiting to see how this team responds to that late collapse. And I think there were some players who kind of came out after the game and said we took our foot off the gas. Bradley Chubb was one of them. There were some communication breakdowns that Mike McDaniel alluded to in the back end of the defense that helped contribute to that. The Dolphins had Deshaun Elliott go out with injuries right around the time that Tennessee ended up getting 150 yards and 2 touchdowns in their final 2 possessions in the final 4 minutes. So a lot of compounding factors. The Dolphins offense did not play great. They're a little banged up on both sides of the ball. It really kind of has this extra level of anticipation coming into the Jets game, just because I think a lot of Dolphins fans recognize this is a big opportunity to bounce back and showcase that this is not the same old Dolphins, which is where everybody's mind unfortunately goes.
Yeah, and from an outsider perspective, I mean, you lose bad games every year. I mean, there's always like 1 or 2 games where you look back on and you say that's a horrible loss. I mean, Dolphins just happened to have one of theirs Monday night. So from an outsider perspective, I wouldn't be super worried about, how they lost that game. I guess the thing I would worry about a little bit, though, is it seems like they were a little banged up in that game. Do you have any injury updates on the Dolphins heading into this one?
Yeah, so I would not expect to see Robert Hunt, the right guard. Connor Williams tears his ACL against the Titans. He goes on IR. The Dolphins add 2 center eligible players, and they had an approximation for Wednesday's injury report that included the backup center, Liam Eichenberg, listed as a non-participant with a calf injury. So who knows what his status is? The fact that they added 2, they added Jonathan Harrison, who was most recently with the Falcons, and then they added Matt Skura to the practice squad. Doesn't give you a lot of warm and fuzzies about that situation. I definitely look to the offensive line. I do think Deshaun Elliott, the safety who left late in the game, and his absence helped contribute to those miscommunications down the stretch. He has a rib injury and is in concussion protocol. So I would expect he's probably not going to get turned around on a short week to get ready to play the Jets. The Dolphins are hopeful to get Javon Holland back. Javon Holland, they have not seen since the Black Friday game against the Jets. He got injured late in that game. He came out at the beginning of this week and said he's been dealing with 2 sprained MCLs, just based on a tackle attempt and how he got landed on that turf at MetLife. And his return would be huge. If the Dolphins have to run out there with 2 backup safeties, I would say that's probably a bigger issue for them than the interior offensive line injuries. I'd expect you probably see Teron Armstead this week. I expect you probably see some of the vet rest guys. Tyreek Hill got banged up. I think he'll probably be on a snap count, but I expect him to play because he came back and finished that game and looked good in doing so and still made some plays. So, yeah, Miami's, this is a little bit more of a survival game as far as if they're going to win the football game. It's probably going to have to be ugly. And they have showcased at times that they can win ugly. The Raiders game was an example of that. It looked like they were going to win the Titans game ugly, but you're going to play a full 60 minutes.
Yeah, and I think when the Jets win this year, I mean, aside from what you saw this past Sunday, when the Jets win, it's typically ugly. Typically, it's a low-scoring game. Typically, it's when the Jets defense able to hold the other team down. And, part of that is the Jets have dealt with their own injuries this year. I mean, obviously, Aaron Rodgers is storyline number 1 when it comes to that. But Jets have had, I believe it's 10 different offensive line alignments in 13 games. They've been, injuries happen on the offensive line, obviously. Guy rolls the wrong way, it can cause an injury, it can cause problems, but Jets have been really banged up. And I think one of the reasons I feel like the offensive success the Jets may have had on Sunday against Houston, where they scored 30 points in a half. This is a Jets offense that, hadn't gotten to the end zone twice since week 4 prior to this past Sunday, puts up 30 points in a half, but the offensive line was still not very good in that game. I think there was a lot of Zach Wilson making impressive plays. I think, there were a couple times he evaded pressure. They did a good job drawing up plays to get the ball out of his hands quickly. But this Jets team, I don't think you can count on them to put up 30 points ever again this season. I think that, maybe they won't be as bad as they looked at the 5 games heading into last week. But offensive line remains an issue. I mean, it kind of like I host a daily podcast on the Jets, and the guy they started at right guard, Jake Hansen, this was a guy I didn't really know prior to like Saturday of last week. I mean, that shows you the state of this offensive line, where they're just pulling guys in left and right off the street. So, I think this is looking like I think this is an ugly game. I bet you that the promo on the networks want to hear Jets Dolphins. It's going to be ugly.
Yeah, and I think the game total for this over on FanDuel is like 37.5 points. So they're not expecting a ton of points either.
Here's the best thing, Kyle, is that last week the over under I think it was 33, and the Jets and Texans are scoreless at the half, and it's the weather's horrible, it's raining, it's windy, and I remember saying like you got to feel pretty good if you took the under, and then the over won because the Jets put up 30 points in the second half.
And you never know. We'll see what the weather holds for South Florida. It can get wet, although it won't probably be hot, and it won't be cold and wet like it was at MetLife last week for that Jets big win against the Texans. We're going to talk about some matchups to watch in this contest up next here on this Crossover Thursday episode here on the Locked On Network. Stick with us. Today's Crossover Thursday is brought to you by BetterHelp. Whether or not your family gives gifts during the holidays, you get to define how you give to yourself this holiday season, and the holidays are a great time to start doing exactly that. So whether it's by starting therapy, going easier on yourself during the tough moments, or treating yourself to a day of complete rest, remember to give yourself some love this holiday season. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out the brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you could switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. In the season of giving, give yourself what you need with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. So, John, matchups to watch. We've both alluded to offensive line injuries that don't give you the warm and fuzzies. I guess I would ask you, I saw a couple Jets defensive linemen, whether it's Franklin Myers or Solomon Thomas, who were on the injury report as do not participate or non-participants on Wednesday's injury report for the Jets. What is their status? Because I think that can be potentially a matchup that goes in favor of the Jets against the interior offensive line of the Dolphins with how banged up they are.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I think that when we're talking about Jets interior defensive lineman, it's Quinnen Williams is the guy, and he's not putting up the numbers he did last year, but he's having a season that's almost as good. Even if the stats don't reflect that. So the spot next to him has been kind of an issue all season long. Quinton Jefferson's put up a couple sacks. He's been okay. Solomon Thomas is producing a relatively higher level than he has the rest of his career. But I still think the interior defensive line is all about Quinnen Williams. In fact, that probably would be one of the matchups I look at. You mentioned Liam Eichenberg, his status might be up in the air. I was going to say Quinnen Williams versus Eichenberg and the rest of the Miami interior offensive line. I mean, that's a spot I'm looking at because, again, going back to what we just said, if the Jets are going to win this game, the Jets are going to stay in this game, it's got to be ugly. And I think a lot of that would depend on Quinnen Williams, playing really well up front. Franklin Myers, actually, believe it or not, Franklin Myers actually plays a lot on the edge. He plays a lot of defensive end. And that is an area where I do think the Jets have good depth. Jermaine Johnson's stepped up his second season. He was a first-round pick a year ago who was kind of a rotational guy last season, and he's developed into a quality full-time starter this year. He's a three-down guy. He can play the run. He can get after the quarterback. And the Jets also have Bryce Huff, who on a snap-by-snap basis is one of the most productive pass rushers in the NFL. I mean, he's great at generating pressures. The Jets used him primarily as like a third down specialist last year, but he stepped into a bigger role this season. So the one thing the Jets do have on the defense, they have a lot of defensive line depth. And it's a philosophical thing with Robert Saleh. He likes to rotate guys in and out. He likes to keep his guys fresh. So they've really invested on the defensive line. So we'll see whether these guys are able to play, but I do think the Jets have a lot of quality on the defensive line. So I think like one or two injuries may not impact them as much as they might another team.
What about from your perspective, a matchup that really stands out elsewhere, maybe outside the trenches? Who knows?
Yeah, I'm actually, I don't do this ever, but like, I think like the coaching staffs are interesting to me. I'm looking at Nathaniel Hackett versus Vic Fangio. Hackett's not been good this year. I've been very critical of him. In fact, Kyle, if you turn on any random episode of Locked On Jets, odds are there's a rant about me about Nathaniel Hackett, the way he's running his offense. But last week, I thought was an improvement. The Jets used pre-snap motion more frequently. You saw that helped Zach Wilson identify some keys in coverage and kind of helped him with his pre-snap reads and get the ball out quickly. The other thing is, and this was really a second half thing, and maybe it was due to the weather getting a little bit better in the second half, but they were more aggressive on their first down play calls. Prior to halftime, if you take out a kneel down, the Jets had to run out the clock in the first half. The Jets ran the ball 7 times out of 10 on first down. In the second half, before the game got out of hand, when it was within 2 scores, there were 11 passing plays called versus 6 rushing attempts. Now, there were a couple of Zach Wilson scrambles that kind of mess with the true run pass ratio, but they were more aggressive in their play calling on first down. And that's been an issue because the Jets have been very predictable on first down this year. Lots of times they're slamming the ball into a loaded box. And, I mean, if you listen to some of the announcers who call the games, I mean, Tony Romo's been on this when Nance and Romo have had Jets games this year. He talks about how the Jets need to throw the ball on first down. You need to throw it when the other team is expecting run. Nathaniel Hackett's best game, I thought the game against the Texans was Nathaniel Hackett's best game since the Jets lost to the Kansas City Chiefs. And in that game, he was also very aggressive. The next week after the Kansas City game, they kind of went into a shell against the Denver Broncos, and they put up a lot of points, but in the second half, they got very conservative, and I think they left Denver in the game. I think that they were settling for field goals. So I think like Hackett has to remain aggressive, and he's going up against Vic Fangio, who I've always had a lot of respect for. I've always thought is one of the best defensive minds in the game, and I think it's not an accident. And I know you can like fall into the trap of saying, well, if it works, that must mean the play caller's good. And if it doesn't work, it means the play caller's bad. But I do think Hackett's most aggressive games have coincided with Zach Wilson performing his best this season. So I'm looking for Hackett. I'm looking at what Hackett does against Vic Fangio, who I think is a great defensive mind.
I look to the Dolphins running game on the perimeter as another area, and specifically the skill players. I think that's an area for Miami's. They've had some issues in some of the games that they've played this season when they try to run crack toss or get outside, and they're asking these wide receivers and skill players to crack down on defensive linemen, to get up on top of linebackers and help create the wall and seal. And when you have the speed that the Jets have with Quincy Wilson and with CJ Mosley, or Quincy Williams, they can really fly around and take some angles away from you. And then they do have these big bodied guys on the edge, be it Franklin Myers or Jermaine Johnson, who's obviously very explosive in his own right. So I don't feel great about Miami's ability to run the ball between the tackles against this group, just because if Eichenberg doesn't play, your center's probably Lester Cotton, who's your never taken snaps in an NFL game as a center. That makes Rob Jones, who was on IR the first time these teams played, one of your guards. Your other guard, it depends on if Teron Armstead's back, and then they may move Kendall Lamb inside and play him at one of the guard spots. They may elevate Ryan Hayes off the practice. Like, there's a whole lot of unknowns as far as if Eichenberg can't go, what that interior is going to look like, because it doesn't sound like Robert Hunt's going to be able to go for them, who's arguably their best offensive lineman. So you're going to have to win on the edge. I don't think you can slam up into this group with the linebackers that they have and with Quinnen Williams on the interior and have a lot of success. So how do those skill players successfully secure those blocks? And if they're going to have success in this game running the ball, and they put up a lot of rushing yards the first time these two teams played each other, it was 167 yards, so they had some ability to move the ball. It's going to have to come, I think, from the skill group on the outside with their blocks, as compared to this makeshift interior offensive line that we've talked so much about.
Yeah, and I think Jets fans feel your pain. As I mentioned, I think there have been 10 different iterations of the Jets offensive line. They've had to mix guys up every single week. It certainly makes things tougher. And, every week I feel like every week on the crossover shows, we talk about it. This Jets defense is very tough against the pass. They have a lot of good pass rushers, really great group of corners. They're not quite as good against the run. They do have quality linebackers. They have quality interior defensive linemen, but they can be susceptible against the run, and I think especially the outside run. So I think that's a really smart place to look, because I think that could be an area where the Jets are susceptible in this one.
We'll talk a little bit more about keys to victory next here on this crossover Thursday. Appreciate you guys checking us out, and stick with us. As the weather gets colder, the deals stay hot over for FanDuel and their NFL Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if the team that you pick wins straight up on the money line, regardless of the odds. So if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get started and to get in on the action than right now. The app is super easy to use. They have a variety and wide range of ways for you to place bets, whether that is the spread, player props, over-unders, game totals, money line, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and keep your NFL season hot as the season outside gets cool. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. So aside of turnover differential, we kind of went into the coaching staffs a little bit. If we're expecting an ugly game or an uglier game, keys to victory for the Jets. What's the one big thing for you, John?
I think somebody other than Garrett Wilson or Breece Hall needs to step up on this offense. Jets have two quality young players, and if you watch the Jets over the last decade, having two quality young players is an unusual thing. The Jets offense typically has not had many pieces. They've gotten a lot of contributions out of Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall this year. They're both having excellent seasons. Now, the last couple of weeks with the offensive line issues, Hall has not been as effective as a runner. In fact, his numbers rushing have not been good, but he's been effective as a receiver. And when the Jets get him the ball in space, he can still make big plays. But after those two, the Jets have not really had quality contributions. Last week, part of the reason they scored 30 points in the second half was they finally had some guys step up, and it was at the tight end position. Tyler Conklin made a couple of catches in traffic, especially on key downs. Jeremy Ruckert, second-year guy out of Ohio State, also chipped in 3 catches. And then they also got contributions from a couple role players made big plays. Xavier Gipson scored on a little end around in the red zone. Randall Cobb, who has been an invisible man all season long, reemerged. He actually had a catch, which is his 4th catch all season. Randall Cobb was a really good player for a long time for Green Bay, only on the team because he's Aaron Rodgers' friend. And again, going into last week, only had 3 catches, had a catch in the red zone that he took into the end zone for a touchdown. So I don't know who it's going to be this week, but somebody from the Jets has to step up. They can't just have two skilled guys who produce for them. There has to be contributions from supporting players, and sometimes you just need contributions from role players, like a play or two here from role players like Cobb and Gibson. Will Allen Lazard finally produce for the Jets? During that first meeting, which I've blocked out from my memory, Lazard was a healthy scratch. He's been an enormous disappointment as a free agent. In the Jets' offensive outburst last week, he had 0 catches and 1 penalty. So maybe Allen Lazard's the guy who steps up this week, but the Jets need to continue to get contributions outside of their big two.
And for me, I think one thing that's going to be really important, and they did not connect on their attempt at doing this against the Titans on Monday Night Football, but they hit a couple of these kinds of plays against the Commanders on 3rd down. They hit 2 of these shots down the field against the Jets the first time that they played. Jalen Waddle got 1 on Sauce Gardner, and Tyreek Hill got the other on the opening possession of the game, another 3rd down play from the slot against DJ Reed. And I think when the Dolphins have their opportunities to identify some man coverage, they are going to have to hit a few in-rhythm shots over the top to make sure that the screws don't get too tight on the roof for the Jets. Where, if you want to crowd the line of scrimmage, if you feel like they're not going to, really compress and have a lot of success pushing the ball down the field, and the Jets want to compress and squeeze and get more bodies within the first 10 yards to help with run support and have an extra, that safety be able to run the alley and get out there and help on the edge, you got to be able to counter that selectively. And Miami had success linking those up in their past few games. They only ran one of those, and it was to running back Devon Achane against the Titans. And Achane kind of stacks his defender and he looks back, but he kind of slows down and then he has to flip the switch and run it again. And Tua did a really nice job hitting his back foot, hitching into the throw, and immediately releasing. And both of those plays that they hit against the Jets were in rhythm, back foot in the ground, ball is out, the ball is up and down between 25 and 30 yards on shots down the field because you identified coverage. So for me, to help make sure you got the room that you need in the running game to get to the perimeter, you got to keep the safeties honest. You got to hit a couple plays up over the top and use the speed that you have, especially if Tyreek Hill's going to be a little limited with what kind of routes that he can run. Use him on that vertical plane and still force teams to respect his speed, force teams to respect Jalen Waddle's speed, and hopefully that gives you enough room and enough space to be able to have some consistency running the football this week.
And on those plays, one of the things I'm going to be interested to see is whether the Jets try and match Sauce Gardner with Tyreek Hill a little bit more. The Jets are not a team that typically shadows one corner with one receiver. Usually Sauce Gardner goes to the left, DJ Reed goes to the right, and they'll do it a little bit more on third down on obvious passing downs when you'll see more man coverage. But Jets typically just have their corners play on sides. I think there were a couple of first meeting when the Dolphins got Tyreek Hill matched up against DJ Reed, and DJ Reed's an excellent corner. I think part of the reason the Jets approach it this way is they trust DJ Reed against pretty much any receiver in the NFL. But this might be like one of the few exceptions. This might be one of the few cases where you want to make sure Sauce Gardner stays with Tyreek Hill most of the game, and we'll see whether the Jets make that adjustment in this one. I'll be interested to see how they approach that.
There are a lot of interesting storylines. It's always great to play a team twice because it gives you a whole new evaluation lens to put both of these teams through. The Jets trying to work back towards 500 here in the final stretch of the season. The Dolphins trying to hit double-digit wins and take another step closer to potentially clinching a playoff berth and potentially clinching the AFC East in the weeks ahead. So make sure you tune in on Sunday for Dolphins Jets 2.0 this season. We look forward to bringing you all of the post-game coverage. John will have you covered for Locked On Jets. I will have you covered for Locked On Dolphins. We appreciate you guys for checking out this crossover Thursday, and check out all of the great shows that we have here on the Locked On Network. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Enjoy the game on Sunday.